Savannah Delacruz, 34, stared at her phone in disbelief. The text from her mother was clear. We changed all the locks on the front door and also the gate. Don't bother coming home. After 15 years of managing her parents' finances, she had discovered something that shattered her entire understanding of family loyalty. Now standing in the rain with nowhere to go, she realized this was only the beginning of her family's revenge. Hey everyone! Before I dive into how my entire family turned against me overnight, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family revenge drama already has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma comes full circle in this family betrayal. Now let's get back to that fateful rainy night. The events leading to my lockout began 3 months earlier. As the eldest daughter and the only financially responsible member of the Delacruz family, I had been managing my parents' accounts since my college graduation. My father Eduardo had a successful construction business but terrible money habits. My mother Caroline spent excessively on her social climbing pursuits. My younger siblings, twins Mason and Madison, were perpetually finding themselves at age 30, constantly needing financial bailouts. I never minded being the responsible one. With my accounting degree and financial advisor certification, managing their finances gave me a sense of purpose. Every month I'd organize their bills, allocate savings, and ensure investments were on track. They had given me power of attorney years ago, trusting me implicitly with their financial future. My own financial planning business was thriving with clients who respected my expertise and integrity. The discovery happened during a routine monthly review of their accounts. I noticed an unusual pattern of withdrawals, small enough to fly under the radar but frequent enough to add up to nearly $75,000 over 2 years. The transactions were labeled as ED medical services, which made no sense. My father was in perfect health, and if he had medical issues, I would have known. I called the bank for clarification. The representative explained these were payments to a company called Exclusive Destinations, not medical services. When I researched the company, I discovered it was a luxury travel agency specializing in discreet romantic getaways. My first thought was identity theft. I immediately froze the accounts and drove to my parents' house armed with paperwork to report fraud. When I arrived, they were hosting one of their frequent dinner parties, the house filled with their country club friends. My mother's face fell when she saw me burst in, clearly uninvited. "Savannah, what a surprise," she said, her voice tight. "We're in the middle of dinner. We need to talk," I insisted. "There's been suspicious activity on your accounts." My father exchanged a look with my mother that I couldn't interpret. He excused himself from their guests and led me to his study, my mother following closely behind. "Someone's been making payments to a travel agency," I explained, showing them the statements. "Almost $75,000 over 2 years. We need to report this fraud immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents didn't look shocked or concerned, they looked guilty. "It's not fraud, Savannah," my father finally said. "Those trips were legitimate expenses." My mother sat down heavily in the leather armchair. "Your father and I have been taking trips together, private trips, without telling me. Why would you hide vacation expenses?" I was confused. My father cleared his throat. "Because they weren't with your mother. At least not all of them." The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father had been using family funds to finance affairs my mother apparently knew about. "It's a arrangement we have," my mother said coldly, seeing my expression. "And frankly, it's none of your business." "None of my business? I manage your finances. I'm responsible for your retirement planning. How could you do this?" My father's face hardened. "You work for us, Savannah. You don't get to judge how we spend our money. Work for you. I've been managing your finances for free for 15 years. I've saved you from bankruptcy twice." My mother stood up. And we're grateful. But you've always been too controlling, too judgmental. This is our life, not yours to manage. I was speechless. Years of sacrificing my time, turning down better opportunities to stay close to them all to ensure their financial security, and this was how they saw my dedication. I need some time to process this, I said, gathering my papers. But we need to discuss how this affects your financial future. $75,000 is a significant drain on your retirement savings. We'll discuss it later, my mother said dismissively. Our guests are waiting. As I left, I heard the party resuming as if nothing had happened. My siblings were there too, laughing loudly, probably enjoying the expensive wine I had advised against purchasing. I felt like a stranger in my own family, the only one who seemed to care about consequences and responsibility. Little did I know my discovery had triggered a family crisis meeting that would take place the very next day, one I wouldn't be invited to attend. The De La Cruz family was closing ranks, and for the first time in my life I was on the outside. The day after discovering my father's infidelity fund, I tried calling both my parents. Neither answered. I texted them about meeting to discuss financial restructuring, but received only vague responses about being busy with appointments. This was unusual. Typically they were eager to discuss money matters, especially when it involved their access to funds. By evening, my sister Madison called, her voice uncharacteristically serious. We need to talk, Savannah. Can you meet at Riverside Cafe tomorrow morning? Who's we? I asked. Me, Mason, Mom, and Dad. We've been talking and there are some concerns we need to address. My stomach knotted with anxiety, but I agreed to the meeting. That night I barely slept, reviewing financial documents and preparing explanations about the importance of financial fidelity and transparency. I genuinely believed we could work through this as a family. The next morning I arrived at the cafe early, armed with my laptop and financial projections. When my family walked in 20 minutes late, their unified front was immediately apparent. They sat across from me, 4 pairs of eyes regarding me coldly. We've made a decision, my father began without preamble. We're removing you as our financial manager. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. What? Why, you've overstepped your boundaries, my mother said. We've consulted with another financial advisor who agrees that your conservative approach has actually been limiting our potential returns. What advisor? Who would recommend more risky investments at your age? I was genuinely concerned. Mason smirked. Brandon Wheeler. He's brilliant with alternative investments. My blood ran cold. Brandon Wheeler was known in financial circles for borderline unethical investment schemes targeting wealthy retirees. I had warned clients about him many times. He's under investigation by the Securities Commission, I said. You can't seriously be considering working with him. See, this is exactly the problem, Madison interjected. You think you know everything. Brandon has helped several of Mom and Dad's friends triple their investments in just months. Those are likely Ponzi schemes, I explained, trying to keep my voice level. The early investors get paid with new investors' money. It's not sustainable and it's probably illegal. My father waved his hand dismissively. We've already signed with him. The papers removing your power of attorney were filed yesterday. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Yesterday. You didn't even discuss this with me first. We're discussing it now, my mother said coolly. We're also establishing a new family trust. Mason will be the trustee. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mason could barely manage his own checking account. Just last year I had bailed him out of $30 0-inches credit card debt he had accumulated buying designer clothes and taking extravagant trips to impress his Instagram followers. This is a mistake, I said, my voice shaking. Brandon Wheeler is dangerous and Mason doesn't have the experience or knowledge to manage a trust. Actually, Mason said, sliding a business card across the table, I've recently become certified as a financial advisor. Brandon fast-tracked my certification through his firm. The card read Mason Delacruz, Financial Advisor, Wheeler Wealth Management. I knew immediately that this certification was likely meaningless, a paper mill credential that required little actual financial knowledge. "This isn't about my financial management, is it?" I finally asked. "This is about me discovering Dad's affair fund." The table fell silent. My mother's face hardened. "We prefer the term lifestyle discretionary account," she said icily. "And yes, your judgmental attitude about our personal choices made us realize you don't respect our autonomy." Autonomy. "You've been lying to me for years while I worked tirelessly to secure your financial future." "Oh, please," Madison rolled her eyes. "You've loved playing the martyr, the responsible one who sacrifices everything for the family. It's your whole identity." Her words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. I had built my self-worth around being the dependable one, the problem solver. But that didn't justify their deception or this ambush. "There's something else you should know," my father said, not meeting my eyes. "We've decided to sell the lake house." The lake house had been in our family for generations. My grandparents had built it, and it was intended to stay in the family forever. More importantly, I had invested over $200,000 of my own money in renovating it over the past 5 years with the understanding that it would eventually pass to me. "You can't sell it," I said, my voice barely audible. "We had an agreement. My investment was a gift to the family." My mother interrupted. "There was never any written agreement about ownership transfer." I sat back, stunned by the calculated cruelty. They had planned this meticulously, making sure to protect themselves legally while cutting me out. "Brandon has a buyer lined up," Mason added smugly. "The proceeds will fund our new investment portfolio." I looked at each family member's face, searching for any sign of remorse or hesitation. There was none. Even Madison, who I had helped through her divorce and subsequent depression just last year, wouldn't meet my eyes. "I see," I said quietly, gathering my things. "I hope you understand the consequences of these decisions." "Is that a threat?" my father asked sharply. "No," I replied. "It's concern for a family I care deeply about, even if that feeling isn't mutual anymore." As I stood to leave, my mother caught my arm. For a moment I thought she might be having second thoughts. Instead, she said, "We'll need all the financial records transferred to Brandon by the end of the week, and your keys to the house and the lake property." I removed her hand from my arm. "You'll have everything you need." Walking out of that cafe, I felt a strange mix of devastation and liberation. The family I had dedicated my life to protecting had just excised me from their circle with surgical precision. But in doing so, they had also freed me from a responsibility that had been shackling me to their endless needs and poor decisions. What I didn't realize then was that their betrayal was just beginning. The real knife twist would come 3 weeks later, when I discovered exactly how deep their deception went and how long they had been planning my financial and emotional execution. 3 days after the cafe ambush, I was still reeling from my family's betrayal. I had dutifully transferred all their financial records to Brandon Wheeler's office, though not without first making copies for myself. Something about the whole situation felt not just hurtful but suspicious, and my financial advisor instincts were on high alert. I was organizing these copies in my apartment when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Theodore Grant, my father's oldest friend and business partner. Uncle Theo, as I'd called him since childhood, had always been a steady presence in our family dynamics. "Savannah, do you have time to meet today?" Theo asked, his voice unusually somber. "There are things you need to know." We arranged to meet at his office downtown, away from anywhere my family might frequent. When I arrived, I was surprised to find not just Theo but also my cousin Eliza and my mother's former assistant Grace. "What's this about?" I asked, suddenly wary of another ambush. Theo gestured for me to sit. "We're concerned about your family's recent decisions, not just for your sake but for their own. Brandon Wheeler's more than just an unethical financial advisor," Eliza explained. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in financial fraud. My firm has been building a case against him for defrauding at least 12 families out of their retirement savings. Grace nodded. Your mother let me go last month after I questioned some unusual expenses I was processing. Now I understand they were payments to Wheeler's firm. How long has this been going on? I asked, trying to piece together the timeline. From what I've gathered, your parents met Wheeler at the Riverside Country Club about 7 months ago, Theo said. He approached them specifically because he knew they were high-net-worth individuals with a family-managed financial structure. He targets families exactly like yours, Eliza added. Wealthy parents with adult children managing their money where he can exploit existing tensions or create new ones. He convinces the parents that their children are controlling their money too conservatively, limiting their deserved lifestyle. The revelation sent a chill through me. So this isn't just about me discovering the affair fund. Wheeler has been deliberately driving a wedge between us. That's our suspicion, Grace confirmed. Your mother began changing after meeting him, more secretive, more dismissive of your financial advice. She even started criticizing you to her friends, which she'd never done before. And Mason's sudden certification, I asked, though I already suspected the answer. A complete sham, Eliza confirmed. Wheeler's certification program isn't recognized by any legitimate financial authority. It's just a way to make family members complicit in his schemes. Theo leaned forward, his expression grave. Savannah, there's more. Wheeler's pattern is consistent. He isolates his targets from financially savvy family members, then gradually moves their assets into his exclusive investment vehicles, which are nothing but shell companies. By the time the families realize what's happening, their money is gone. The implications were horrifying. My parents weren't just choosing a different financial advisor, they were being systematically conned by a practiced predator who had identified their vulnerabilities and exploited them masterfully. We need to stop this, I said. We need to show them what Wheeler is really doing. That's why we called you, Theo said. We've been gathering evidence, but we need your help. You know their finances better than anyone, and you'd recognize suspicious transfers or account changes. But they've cut me off completely. They won't listen to me now, I said, feeling the frustration rise. They don't need to know you're involved yet, Eliza explained. I can get access to Wheeler's current cases through my firm. Grace has copies of communications between your mother and Wheeler, and Theo has been monitoring your father's business accounts, which Wheeler hasn't gotten his hands on yet. And what can I do? I asked. We need your expertise to identify the red flags in their current financial movements, Theo said. And eventually your voice. Despite everything, you're still their daughter. When presented with incontrovertible evidence from multiple trusted sources, they might listen. I thought about my family's betrayal, the cruel dismissal, the lake house, the years of thankless work cast aside. Part of me wanted to let them face the consequences of their choices. But the larger part, the part that had always protected them, couldn't stand by while they were being manipulated and robbed. Okay, I agreed. I'm in. But we need to move quickly. How much time do we have? Based on Wheeler's previous cases, he typically begins major asset transfers within the first 2 months, Eliza said. So we have maybe 3 to 5 weeks before irreversible damage is done. Then let's get started, I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next week, our unlikely alliance worked tirelessly. Grace provided emails showing Wheeler had been coaching my mother on how to respond to my questions about the unusual withdrawals. Eliza shared redacted case files showing Wheeler's methodology with other families. Theo reported that Wheeler had already approached him about joining the exciting new investment opportunity my parents had discovered. The pattern was unmistakable and deeply disturbing. Wheeler wasn't just a con man, he was a master manipulator who destroyed families for profit. His technique involved isolating his victims from financially savvy relatives, creating a false sense of financial sophistication in more vulnerable family members like Mason, and exploiting existing family tensions to break bonds of, quote, trust. Most disturbingly, we discovered that Wheeler had a history of romantic entanglements with his clients, often targeting unhappy spouses or recently divorced individuals. Given my father's lifestyle discretionary account, I worried that Wheeler might have already sunk his hooks deeper into my family than we initially thought. As our evidence mounted, we began formulating a plan to expose Wheeler and save my family from financial ruin. But we had to be careful. If they realized I was involved too soon, they might reject our warnings out of spite or misplaced pride. What we didn't anticipate was that Wheeler would accelerate his timeline. 2 weeks into our investigation, Theo called me in a panic. "Your parents just listed their primary residence for sale," he said, "and Wheeler's company is the buyer." My blood ran cold. Their house was worth at least $2.3 million. But knowing Wheeler, the purchase agreement would be well below market value, possibly disguised as some kind of sale-leaseback arrangement that would ultimately leave my parents homeless. "We need to move now," I told Theo. "Today." As I hung up, my phone chimed with a text message from my mother. "We changed all the locks on the front door and also the gate. Don't bother coming home." They knew. Somehow Wheeler had discovered our investigation and convinced my family that I was the threat. The battle lines had been drawn and the stakes had just gotten much higher. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about saving my family from themselves. Standing in the rain outside my family home, the home I was now locked out of, I realized we had severely underestimated Brandon Wheeler. Somehow he had not only detected our investigation but had managed to turn my family even further against me. My phone buzzed with incoming texts from Mason. "How dare you spread lies about Brandon? He told us everything about your jealousy and attempts to sabotage his business. Stay away from our family. You've done enough damage." I showed the messages to Theo, who had driven me to the house after I received my mother's text. "Wheeler's playing offense," he said grimly. "Classic conman tactic: when discovered, attack the credibility of those exposing you." "What now?" I asked, feeling defeated. "Now we go with Plan B," Theo replied. "Direct confrontation with evidence they can't ignore." Our original plan had been to approach my parents privately, showing them the evidence against Wheeler gradually. But with Wheeler accelerating his timeline and poisoning my family against me, we needed a more dramatic intervention. Eliza and Grace were already at Theo's office preparing our case file. We joined them, and for the next 4 hours, we assembled what amounted to a prosecutorial brief against Brandon Wheeler: financial records showing his previous frauds, testimonials from former victims, evidence of his fake certification programs. And most damning of all, a draft contract Grace had discovered on my mother's computer, a transfer deed that would sign over my parents' house to Wheeler's shell company for 1/3 its market value. "We need to present this in a way they can't dismiss," Eliza advised. "Somewhere public enough that Wheeler can't control the narrative, but private enough that your parents won't feel ambushed." "The country club," I suggested. "They have their standing dinner reservation tonight. Wheeler usually joins them." "Perfect," Theo agreed. "I'm still a member. I can get us in." That evening, dressed in business attire and carrying 3 copies of our evidence portfolio, our group arrived at the Riverside Country Club. My stomach churned with anxiety as we entered the dining room and spotted my parents, Mason Madison and Brandon Wheeler, at their usual table near the window. Wheeler saw us first. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps early 40s, handsome in a polished way, with the practiced charm of someone who made his living gaining others' trust. His smile faltered momentarily before he leaned over to whisper something to my father. My father looked up, his expression hardening when he saw me. He stood abruptly. "Savannah, you're not welcome here." "Sir," the maitre d' approached nervously. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Theo interjected smoothly. "I'm hosting these guests at my table, which I'd like set up adjacent to the Dela Cruz party, please." As a founding member of the club, Theo's request was quickly accommodated. We were seated at a table barely 5 feet from my family, close enough that any scene they created would be witnessed by the club's elite membership, something my status-conscious mother would do anything to avoid. Wheeler maintained his composure, though I noticed a tightness around his eyes. Eduardo, Caroline, perhaps we should continue our discussion elsewhere. Actually, Mr. Wheeler, I said loud enough for nearby tables to hear, I think you'll want to stay for this conversation. It concerns your business practices, which I'm sure you'd like the opportunity to defend. I nodded to Eliza, who distributed the evidence portfolios to my parents and Wheeler. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder. What is this nonsense? My father demanded, though he was already scanning the documents. Evidence that Mr. Wheeler is currently under investigation for financial fraud in 3 states, I explained calmly. Evidence that the certification program Mason completed isn't recognized by any legitimate financial authority. And evidence that the contract to purchase your home, which you were planning to sign tomorrow, would transfer your property to Wheeler's shell company for approximately 1/3 its market value. Mason grabbed the folder from my father. This is just more of Savannah's controlling behavior. Brandon warned us you'd try something like this. Actually, Grace spoke up. I compiled much of this evidence myself from documents in your mother's office, including emails where Mr. Wheeler coached her on how to hide financial information from Savannah. My mother's face had gone pale. She was staring at a particular page, the testimonial from Wheeler's previous victim, Margaret Thornton, who had lost her entire inheritance and now lived in subsidized senior housing. This can't be right, she whispered. Wheeler's charm never faltered. Caroline, Eduardo, this is clearly a coordinated attack from a daughter who can't accept that you've chosen a different financial path. These allegations are completely fabricated. Are they? Theo challenged, sliding another document across the table, a cease and desist letter from the Securities and Exchange Commission addressed to Wheeler's firm. The SEC doesn't send these for fabricated concerns. The restaurant had grown quiet, other diners sensing the tension at our tables. My father was reading through the portfolio methodically, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Wheeler stood suddenly. This is harassment. I won't subject my clients to this ambush. He turned to my parents. I'll call you tomorrow after you've had time to process this. Creative fiction. As he tried to leave, Eliza stepped into his path. Mr. Wheeler, as a representative of Harrington Legal, I should inform you that we've submitted all of this evidence to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. They're quite interested in adding the Dela Cruz case to their existing investigation. Wheeler's composure cracked. A flash of panic crossed his face before he pushed past Eliza and strode rapidly toward the exit. The silence at our table was deafening. Madison was the first to speak, her voice small and uncertain. Is this real? All of it. Every word, I confirmed. Wheeler has done this to at least 12 other families. He identifies wealthy families with internal tensions, exploits those tensions to isolate his targets from financially savvy relatives, and then systematically drains their assets. My father looked up from the documents, his face ashen. The lake house sale closed yesterday, he said quietly. Wheeler's company was the buyer. The news hit me like a physical blow. The family lake house, the place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, where my grandparents had taught me to swim and fish, was gone. That's not all, my mother added, unable to meet my eyes. We've already transferred most of our liquid assets into Wheeler's exclusive investment fund. I felt dizzy with the implications. How much? Nearly $2 million, my father admitted. The magnitude of Wheeler's theft was staggering. He had systematically dismantled my family's financial security in a matter of weeks, all while turning them against the one person who could have protected them. Can we get it back? Mason asked. The smug financial advisor persona completely gone, replaced by the uncertain boy who had always relied on his older sister to fix his problems. Maybe, I said. If we act quickly. The lake house sale might be reversible if we can prove fraud. The liquid assets will be harder to recover. Wheeler typically moves that money offshore immediately. My mother began to cry silently. My father reached for her hand. How could we have been so blind? He asked, more to himself than to anyone at the table. The question hung in the air, unanswerable in its simplicity. How indeed? How had a lifetime of trust between parent and child been so easily shattered by a smooth-talking con man? How had my years of loyal service to their financial well-being been so quickly forgotten? I think Theo said gently that this is a conversation the Delacruz family needs to have privately. Savannah, do you want us to stay? I looked at my family, broken, humiliated, and facing financial ruin of their own making. Despite everything, I felt a responsibility toward them that transcended their betrayal. No, I said. Thank you all for your help, but I need to talk to my family alone. As Theo, Eliza, and Grace departed, I moved to sit at my family's table. The five of us sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of Wheeler's deception and their betrayal hanging heavy between us. What happens now? Madison finally asked. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would determine the future of our family. Now we fight. Together. But first we need to have an honest conversation about how we got here. About why it was so easy for Wheeler to turn you against me. About trust and respect and what it means to be a family. My father nodded slowly, tears in his eyes for the first time I could remember. We're listening. I wish I could tell you that moment fixed everything, that my family immediately recognized their mistake, and we unified against the common enemy that was Brandon Wheeler. But real life isn't that simple, and family wounds don't heal overnight. What I can tell you is that moment marked the beginning of a new chapter 1, where difficult truths would be spoken, painful reckonings would be faced, and perhaps eventually a stronger family might emerge from the ashes of betrayal. Hey everyone, I know I've left you hanging at a crucial moment in our family drama. Can you believe how quickly things escalated? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you would do in my position. Would you forgive family members who betrayed you this deeply, or would you help them recover their assets but then walk away? While you're pondering that impossible choice, please hit that like button if you're invested in seeing how this all plays out. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the shocking revelations coming up in the next parts of this story. I promise the family showdown that follows will leave you speechless. The weeks following our confrontation at the country club were some of the most difficult of my life. My family and I embarked on a two-pronged mission to recover as much of their stolen assets as possible, and to rebuild trust that had been shattered not just by Wheeler's manipulation but by years of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings. The financial recovery came first, primarily because it was the most urgent. Wheeler had disappeared the night of our confrontation, but the legal machinery we set in motion didn't require his presence. With Eliza's firm now officially representing my family, we filed emergency injunctions to freeze Wheeler's accounts and reverse the recent property transfers. The lake house sale posed the greatest challenge. Wheeler had immediately resold it to a shell company based in the Cayman Islands, a classic money laundering technique. Tracking the actual ownership through layers of corporate veils required legal expertise beyond what Eliza's firm could provide. We need a financial crimes specialist, I told my family during one of our daily strategy sessions now held in my small apartment since they had been forced to move out of their home. Someone who understands international property law and offshore banking. Can we afford that? My mother asked quietly. It was a question that would have been unthinkable just a month earlier when the Delacruz family's wealth had seemed limitless. We have to, I replied. The lake house isn't just a property, it's our heritage. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the night at the country club, finally spoke up. I know someone. Alexandra Vega. She helped a contractor I worked with recover assets from a similar fraud scheme last year. Alexandra proved to be exactly what we needed, a razor-sharp financial crimes attorney with connections to international banking regulatory authorities. She didn't sugarcoat the situation. About 60% of your liquid assets are likely gone for good, she told us during our first meeting. Wheeler moved them through a series of offshore accounts within hours of receiving the transfers. However, the properties are a different story. Real estate transactions leave a clearer paper trail and the fraud is more easily proven. With Alexandra's guidance, we focused our efforts on recovering the properties while pursuing criminal charges against Wheeler to potentially recover some of the cash assets. The process was grueling, requiring detailed documentation of every financial transaction my family had made over the past decade. This necessity forced us to confront the patterns that had made them vulnerable to Wheeler in the first place. My father's lifestyle discretionary account became a topic we could no longer avoid. I started it after your mother and I separated briefly 15 years ago, he admitted during one late-night document review session. Only my father and I were still awake, sorting through years of bank statements. I paused, shocked. You and Mom separated? I never knew that. He sighed heavily. It was when you were in college. We decided not to tell you kids. Your mother discovered I had been unfaithful and she left for 3 months. The revelation stunned me. My parents had always presented a united front, their marriage seemingly unshakable despite their financial irresponsibility. When she agreed to come back, he continued, part of our arrangement was that I could maintain certain freedoms but with financial transparency between us. The separate account was our compromise, and Mom was really okay with this. I couldn't hide my disbelief. Your mother had her own reasons for accepting the arrangement, he said carefully. She valued our family's social position and the lifestyle my business provided, and she had her own connections outside our marriage. The foundation of my understanding of my parents' relationship crumbled. All those years I had been meticulously managing their finances, believing I was preserving their perfect marriage and secure retirement. They had been living a completely different reality, one with complex compromises and secret pain. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. Pride, I suppose, he admitted. And then after a while, shame. You always looked up to us, Savannah. You were so determined to help us build this perfect financial future. We didn't want to disappoint you. So, instead you let me believe a lie. We let you believe what you needed to believe to be happy, he countered. Was that so wrong? I had no answer for him that night. But his confession sparked similar moments of brutal honesty throughout our recovery process. Madison revealed her resentment over my financial success while she struggled after her divorce. Mason admitted he had agreed to Wheeler's sham certification program partly to finally earn our father's respect by becoming a financial expert like Savannah. My mother's confession came last and hit hardest. I was jealous of you, she told me one evening as we sorted through property documents. Your independence, your confidence with money. I married young and became financially dependent on your father immediately. When his infidelities began, I stayed partly because I couldn't imagine supporting myself. Why didn't you ask me for help? I asked. I would have helped you become financially independent. And admit that my daughter had succeeded where I had failed. She shook her head. My pride wouldn't allow it. These painful conversations continued parallel to our legal battle against Wheeler. 2 months after the country club confrontation, we received our first major victory. A judge ruled the lake house sale fraudulent and reversed the transaction. The property would return to our family, though not without substantial legal costs. The primary residence proved more complicated. Wheeler had engineered a sale-leaseback arrangement that, while predatory, had enough legitimate elements to make its reversal difficult. Alexandra advised accepting a settlement that would allow my parents to repurchase their home at 20% below market value, still a significant loss but better than losing it entirely. As for the liquid assets, Alexandra's prediction proved optimistic. Only about 25% of the cash was recoverable even after Wheeler was arrested trying to flee to a non-extradition country. The FBI's investigation revealed that our family was just one of 23 that Wheeler had targeted over the past 5 years, with total losses exceeding $30 million. Most of these families will never recover more than pennies on the dollar, Alexandra explained. You're actually among the fortunate ones. 6 months after Wheeler's arrest, our financial recovery had reached its conclusion. We had managed to save the lake house, negotiate a reasonable repurchase of the primary residence, and recover about 30% of the liquid assets. The total loss, approximately $1.4 million, was substantial but not catastrophic. With careful management and some lifestyle adjustments, my parents could still have a secure retirement. But the emotional recovery was far from complete. Trust once broken doesn't mend easily. The painful honesty forced upon us by circumstance had exposed fault lines in our family that had existed for decades. Wheeler hadn't created these problems, he had merely exploited them with expert precision. What happens now? Madison asked during a family dinner at my apartment, the first where we weren't discussing legal strategies or financial recovery. It was the same question she had asked the night of the confrontation at the country club, but now it carried different weight. Now it wasn't about money or property, it was about us. That depends, I said, looking at each family member. On whether we want to be a real family with all the honesty and accountability that requires, or if we want to go back to pretending. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable but contemplative. We were all considering what a truly honest Dela Cruz family might look like. 1 year after Brandon Wheeler entered our lives, the Dela Cruz family gathered at the lake house for the first time since recovering the property. The autumn leaves painted the surrounding forest in vibrant hues of red and gold, reflecting on the lake's surface like nature's stained glass. My parents, Mason, Madison, and I sat on the newly rebuilt deck watching the sunset in companionable silence. This peaceful moment hadn't come easily. The rebuilding of our family had been as complicated and painstaking as the legal battle to recover our assets. There had been setbacks, heated arguments, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But there had also been breakthroughs, genuine apologies, and small moments of connection that slowly accumulated into something resembling trust. The financial restructuring of our family had been the simplest part. My parents had accepted my recommendation to establish a proper family trust with transparent governance. Unlike the previous arrangement, this trust included all family members as both beneficiaries and voting trustees, with financial decisions requiring majority approval. It's like a family democracy, Mason had joked during the signing of the trust documents. More like a constitutional monarchy, I had corrected with a smile. I'm still the financial expert, but my powers are now properly checked and balanced. My father had made the most dramatic transformation. After decades of prioritizing appearance over substance, he sold his luxury car collection and downsized his construction business to focus on quality over quantity. Most surprisingly, he volunteered at a financial literacy program for seniors, sharing his experience as a fraud victim to help others avoid similar fates. I spent my life chasing status and hiding my mistakes, he told me after one of these sessions. Now I'm finding purpose in transparency. My mother struggled more with the changes. Her social circle had contracted significantly after news of the fraud spread through the country club. Many of her so-called friends distanced themselves, either embarrassed by association or secretly pleased to see the perfect Caroline Dela Cruz humbled. I don't know who I am without that life, she confessed during one of our weekly coffee meetings, a new tradition we had established to rebuild our relationship. Maybe that's an opportunity, I suggested gently, to discover who you want to be. Slowly she began volunteering at an art therapy program for domestic violence survivors, something she had studied in college before meeting my father. As she reconnected with her younger self's passion, I saw glimpses of a mother I had never known, creative, compassionate, and finding value beyond social status. Mason surprised everyone by enrolling in a legitimate financial planning course at the local community college. "I actually enjoy it when I'm not trying to impress Dad or compete with you," he told me. His natural charisma, once channeled into superficial pursuits, made him an effective educator for his peers. Madison took longest to find her new direction. The divorce that had left her financially and emotionally vulnerable had also robbed her of confidence. She had clung to our parents' lifestyle as a substitute for her own achievements. "I'm 31 and I've never really supported myself," she admitted during a particularly difficult therapy session. Family counseling being another component of our rebuilding process. "I've always been someone's daughter or someone's wife." I recognized in her words the same dependency that had trapped our mother. Breaking that cycle became my personal mission. I helped Madison identify her natural talents in event planning and stakeholder management, skills she had honed while organizing charity galas, but never recognized as marketable. Within months, she had secured an entry-level position at a corporate events company, her first real job and the beginning of her financial independence. As for me, the experience transformed both my professional and personal outlook. My financial planning practice shifted focus to specialize in family wealth governance and fraud prevention. The Dela Cruz case study, anonymized but honest, became a powerful tool for helping other families establish healthier financial relationships. More profoundly, I learned to separate my identity from my role as the family financial savior. I began dating again after years of putting my personal life on hold for family obligations. I rediscovered hobbies abandoned during my years of overwork: painting, hiking, playing the piano, that now sat in my new lakefront cottage. Yes, cottage. The most tangible symbol of our family's transformation was our decision about the lake house. Rather than maintaining it as a single-family property, we subdivided the large lakefront lot into 3 parcels. My parents kept the original house downsized and renovated to be more manageable in their retirement. Madison and Mason shared a modern cabin on the second parcel, arrangement that helped them both financially and emotionally as they established their new independent lives. And I built a small cottage on the third parcel, my first home, that was truly my own, not chosen for its proximity to family obligations. "It's symbolic, isn't it?" my mother observed as we sat on the deck that connected all 3 properties. "We're separate but still connected." "With appropriate boundaries," I added with a smile. My father raised his glass. "To the new Dela Cruz family. More honest, less perfect, and much stronger." As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the strange paradox of our journey. Brandon Wheeler had intended to destroy our family financially while exploiting our dysfunctional dynamics. Instead, he had inadvertently forced us to confront the very issues that made us vulnerable to his manipulation. In trying to tear us apart, he had created the circumstances that ultimately brought us together in a healthier way. The last piece of our recovery fell into place 3 weeks after that lakeside gathering. I received a call from Alexandra Vega. "The FBI task force just seized another of Wheeler's offshore accounts," she reported. "They've recovered approximately $600,000 that belongs to your family." "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely pleased but no longer desperate for the money. "There's more," Alexandra continued. "The prosecutors are offering your family the opportunity to make a victim impact statement at Wheeler's sentencing next month. They believe your testimony could be particularly powerful given how comprehensively you documented his methodology." I promised to discuss it with my family, though I already knew what our answer would be. The opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing similar pain was too important to pass up. That evening I called a family meeting at my cottage. As I explained Alexandra's call, I watched their reactions with a sense of pride. There was no shame in their expressions, now no embarrassment about admitting they had been victims. Instead, I saw determination and a unified purpose that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "We should do it," my father said immediately. "All of us together." My mother nodded. "If our story helps even one family avoid what we went through, it's worth sharing." "Besides," Mason added with his characteristic grin, "there's a certain poetry in using Wheeler's crimes to bring us closer together." Madison smiled. From family tragedy to family testimony, their responses confirmed what I had gradually come to realize over our long journey of recovery. The greatest damage Wheeler had inflicted wasn't financial money could be earned again, assets rebuilt. The most profound theft had been the illusion of family harmony that had masked our dysfunction for decades. And the greatest recovery wasn't the properties or funds we had managed to claw back from his fraud, but the authentic connection we had forged through confronting painful truths together. "So we're agreed," I said, feeling a deep sense of closure. "The Dela Cruz family will tell our story, not just for justice but for healing ours and others." As my family nodded in unified agreement, I felt the final weight lift from my shoulders. The locks my mother had changed that rainy night, both the literal ones on their doors and the metaphorical ones on their hearts, were now permanently open. We had found our way back to each other not by returning to what was, but by creating something entirely new, a family built on truth rather than appearances, on mutual respect rather than obligation, on authentic love rather than dysfunction, disguised as loyalty. 2 years after my mother's text about changing the locks, I stood at the podium in a packed federal courtroom facing Brandon Wheeler directly for the first time since the night at the country club. He sat at the defendant's table in a prison jumpsuit, his formerly sleek appearance now haggard from 18 months in pretrial detention. Behind me sat 22 other families he had defrauded, some who had lost everything, others who had managed partial recovery as we had. "The financial damage Mr. Wheeler caused can be quantified," I told the judge, my family standing supportively behind me. "In our case, approximately $1.4 million. But the emotional damage, the broken trust, the family conflicts he deliberately engineered, the stress and fear he created, those costs are immeasurable." Wheeler avoided my gaze throughout my testimony, but I continued, determined to have him hear the full impact of his crimes. "Mr. Wheeler didn't just steal our money. He studied our family dynamics, identified our vulnerabilities, and systematically exploited them. He turned family members against each other, isolating his victims from those who could protect them. He didn't just commit fraud. He weaponized love and trust against the very people he targeted." I described in methodical detail how Wheeler had manipulated my family using my financial expertise as a prosecutor might present evidence clinically and comprehensively. The judge listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Wheeler with thinly veiled disgust. "However," I concluded, "I want the court to know something important. While Mr. Wheeler temporarily succeeded in dividing our family, his actions ultimately led to a painful but necessary reckoning with long-hidden truths. Today, the Dela Cruz family is stronger, more honest, and more genuinely connected than before he entered our lives." I turned slightly to address Wheeler directly. "You intended to destroy us financially and emotionally for your own gain. You succeeded only temporarily in the first goal and failed completely in the second. Our family has not only recovered but transformed. And now your crimes have brought together 23 families who are working collectively to help others avoid similar predators. Your legacy isn't wealth or success, it's serving as a cautionary tale and catalyst for positive change." The judge sentenced Wheeler to 22 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution to all his victims, an amount exceeding $30 million. Though we all knew most of that money would never be recovered, the sentence provided a sense of justice and closure. Outside the courthouse, the families who had been Wheeler's victims gathered, spontaneously sharing stories and contact information. Someone suggested forming an ongoing support network, not just for emotional recovery but to advocate for stronger protections against financial predators targeting families. The Dela Cruz Family Justice Initiative. Madison suggested, her public relations instincts kicking in. We could create educational resources, lobby for stronger penalties, connect victims with specialized legal help. The idea resonated with everyone present. Within months, what began as a victim support group evolved into a legitimate nonprofit organization with a clear mission: protecting families from predatory financial schemes through education, advocacy, and direct support. My mother, finding purpose in her new role as a survivor rather than a victim, became the organization's most compelling speaker. She candidly shared how social status, anxiety, and relationship insecurity had made her vulnerable to Wheeler's manipulation. Her honesty helped other victims move past shame toward empowerment. My father contributed his business expertise and connections, securing corporate sponsorships and partnerships with financial institutions interested in fraud prevention. Mason, having completed legitimate financial certification, developed educational programs specifically targeting the vulnerabilities Wheeler had exploited. Madison applied her event planning skills to organizing fundraisers and awareness campaigns. And I found my calling in developing systematic protocols for family financial governance structures that promoted transparency and shared decision-making while respecting individual autonomy. Our family trust model became a template adopted by financial advisors nationwide. 3 years to the day after receiving that text about changed locks, we gathered again at the lake house, not just our immediate family but the extended network of survivors, advocates, and allies who had become part of our journey. As the sunset painted the sky in vibrant hues, I reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed our family tragedy into a movement for positive change. "You know what I realized recently," my father said as we stood together on the dock. "Wheeler thought he was writing our family's story, but in the end we took back the narrative and wrote a much better ending," my mother added. I smiled, watching Madison and Mason entertaining our guests with increasingly embellished versions of our courtroom confrontation with Wheeler. Our family wasn't perfect, we still had disagreements, still occasionally fell into old patterns. But now we faced those moments with honesty rather than avoidance, with communication rather than manipulation. The locks that had once symbolized my exclusion from the family now represented a different kind of boundary, the healthy kind that defined our individual spaces while still allowing connection. The message that had once signaled rejection had ultimately led to a profound reunion, not by returning to what was, but by creating something better from the painful lessons we had learned. As I looked out over the gathering of people whose lives had been touched by our story, some still healing, others already transformed, I felt a deep sense of closure and purpose. Wheeler had sent ripples of destruction through many lives, but those ripples had returned as waves of resilience, connection, and justice. I picked up my glass and raised it high. "To changed locks and new keys," I said. "To doors closed and better ones opened. To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build every day through honesty, forgiveness, and love." Thank you all so much for following my family's journey from betrayal to healing. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that ultimately led to positive change? Or do you have questions about protecting your loved ones from financial predators? Don't forget to hit that like button if you found value in our story. Subscribe to hear more true life experiences and share this video with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest betrayals. I'm so grateful for this community and the support you've shown through my family's darkest and brightest moments. Until next time, remember that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most painful challenges.